Hi there, my name is Oliver Lash. I'm a professor of responsible management at ESCP Berlin, and I will give you a quick introduction on how to learn with the holistic competence canvas. Let's have a look. Good. So how to do that? The backstory here is that in about 10 years ago now, 2024, Dirk Moosmeier and I started looking into responsible management competence. We thought, how about doing a systematic literature review of all of the different ethics, responsibility, and sustainability management competences that we know of from the published literature. Back then, we came up with a 5-domain competence framework from that systematic review, but we felt that actually the amount of literature undergirding that framework wasn't ready yet in order to build a fully fledged and very rigorous version of a domain model of responsible management competences, which leads us fast forward to 2022, when now there was a very substantial and well-distributed literature across the ethics, responsibility, and sustainability management competence. And we thought, well, this is the right point in time to synthesize those. So we had 224 articles from a variety of disciplines coming together in our competence domain model, which looks like this. So there are independent competences that exist more or less independently from something that we do with it. I will get to this in just a moment. So those would be knowing competences, so knowledge, they're entities, things in a certain way, acting competences, so certain actions that we're able to do, and being competences, certain ways of us being. So there would be, for instance, values, certain mindsets, certain attitudes in the being ones. So those can be understood relatively independently of what is happening in the world around us. But at the same time, there are also the interdependent competences, the dark gray. So we've got the blue down there, the thinking competence. So this thinking only interacts in relationship to some kind of problem, something we're thinking about, or some subject. The interacting ones, which only exist in relationship to somebody else, to a group of people we are interacting with. And then the becoming competences, which only exist in relationship to some kind of contextual challenge. So this is us in context, if you want so. Fast forward to 2023, when we published this in the Journal of Business Ethics. It's open access, so if you want to have a closer look at the foundations of that holistic competence canvas, which I will introduce in a moment, have a look at this paper. So there we are, the road ahead, learning with that holistic competence canvas. What is it, first of all? So on the left side, you still see our old competence framework, which at some point we illustrated in the most basic form in this table. So we've got the independent competences, and we've got the interdependent competences in those two columns over here. And then we've got the different layers of competence. So we've got an intellectual layer of competences. So knowing and thinking, for instance, are intellectual competence domains. We've got behavioral or practical competences, so acting or interacting. And then we've got personal competences, which would be being and becoming, those two domains. So still we thought this was too abstract, so we moved it on one level further, so or one notch further into a more practical, more applied version of showing those different domains and being able to think about us as persons, as human beings, more holistically across those different layers and the independent, interdependent domains. And this is what you see on the right. This is the holistic learning canvas. And holistic learning, because we see or we notice that there's two main aspirations of wholeness in holistic education, which we typically talk about. So making the human being whole again, and making the whole world or the world whole again. And making the human being whole again involves that we're moving away from that Western kind of a traditional emphasis of cognition and intellect, and particularly the knowing, so the entity-based cognition. So what is it that we know, as opposed to how do we actually think? So there's a first emphasis even in that layer of intellectual competences towards the knowing, not as much towards the thinking, one might argue. But then more importantly, there's a very skewed attention towards that intellectual layer and away from the acting and the personal. Sorry, away from the personal and the practical competences, which somehow are maybe not as important or not as scientific or in some other way inferior, supposedly. So this is what the first aspiration of wholeness attached to saying, okay, there's nothing superior or inferior about all of them. They actually need to be seen and learned in relationship with each other as a whole, in order for us to really learn as a human being. So making the human being whole again. And then the second aspiration of wholeness would be making the world and the human being whole again. So there's no whole human world with us kind of deconnecting ourselves from our environment. So one typical example in a sustainability context would be the idea of human superiority, or this idea that human beings are somewhere outside the environment, that there's human beings and the natural environment while we're really part of it. So the idea is reconnecting there. So how do we do that if we're looking at the competence canvas? The interweaving pedagogy that we suggest is, first of all, a whole person learning move in this weaving. So weaving means we're now not dissecting people into competences as we've done it for a long time, but actually reweaving them, bringing them together in their competent human beings. And how do we do that? By actually learning in all of those three layers on equal footing, on eye level. There's no kind of dominance in one of those layers, but we're actually equally putting them as important elements of any learning, and we're trying to reconnect those layers of intellectual, practical, and personal competences. So this would be a vertical movement. This is how we do whole person learning. And then there's also whole world learning. So whole world learning is whenever we're moving horizontally. So we're reconnecting those kind of independent and the interdependent domains that we talked earlier on. So for instance, we're connecting knowing and thinking in our learning designs, or maybe we move across layers while we do that. So we connect, let's say, being and interacting. So the idea is that we're doing both. We're moving horizontally, and we're moving vertically across the canvas when we're doing learning. And we've been trialing that now for almost 10 years, because the first classes we started teaching using that canvas happened in 2024. And when I'm saying we, in particular, that's Elena Antonakopoulos, Dirk Moosmeyer, and myself, because we have been pushing that topic forwards for quite a long time, but it also involves quite a number of other people who have trialed the competence canvas already. So what are the different kind of salient learning designs, weaving pedagogy designs that we found to be helpful? So the first one would be a climbing pedagogy, very much building on that kind of hierarchical pyramid-like or stages-like idea that we often have in traditional learning theory. So if you're the most typical example, of course, is Bloom's different learning stages. But also you could think about ethical learning or moral development. So the Kohlberg pyramid would be another example, where you somehow say some things are more foundational and you actually have to move up the layers until you come to the things that are more fancy, more advanced, possibly. But here at the same time, it's really important that this is not a valuing of saying, okay, so what's down there is less important, or maybe more important because it's a foundation, or less important because it's something that comes first or that you learn first. But the idea is to make sure that we cover all of those different levels, and there's an idea that it might go a little bit more easily or effectively in terms of learning outcomes if you follow a certain pathway up the mountain. So what we did in the first course where we ever tried that out was actually to have one very heavy learning exercise for each of the 6 competence domains, and we would sequence those learning exercises in a predetermined pathway up the mountain. So we would start with a being exercise, connecting back to personal values, or helping people understand and see their own personal values and mindsets. Moving on to becoming, where we then would see a certain challenge related to the personal values that the environment would pose on them. Then we would move on up there to the acting ones, where it's more about doing something very concrete, for instance, engaging in a certain process and becoming able, competent to carry out that process. Moving on to the interrelating or interacting to the right, where then we would see people interacting in groups, or moving on to the thinking, moving on to the knowing up in the left, and on to the thinking once again. So this is the idea of a climbing exercise or climbing pattern in that interweaving pedagogy. Excuse me. Then the second pattern that we experimented with a lot and we found very helpful moves us away from this predetermined path a little bit. It's more about anchoring now, trying to start somewhere on the competence canvas with an exercise, with a learning intervention, and trying to make sure that this learning intervention, although it starts somewhere, relates up, down, right, and left, so that we are able to already interweave, create those two types of wholeness, whole person and whole world. And an example is that weaving or that anchoring pattern that you see in the middle, which starts out in the interacting competences. This was the exercise of rich pictures, which asks you, or the way we did it very often was to ask a group of students, 3 to 5 of them, to draw out on a flip chart paper with a couple of pens in different colors a sustainability problem. In particular, in this case, it was related to some of the SDGs. And one of the examples was urbanization, the social environmental problems related to urbanization. So of course, they do that as a group. So they foster their group interact competence as individuals. Together, they foster the individual interacting competence, but at the same time, of course, also drawing a picture like that helps you to think in complex terms. So you're able to create connections between the different elements of the rich picture that you're drawing. Then it also helps you to position yourself in the picture. So you, as somebody living in an urban environment, where are you? What is your role? What are your responsibilities? So that connects us down here to the becoming competence. And then horizontally, we would move over to an act competence as well, because afterwards you're able how to, you're able, competent to map out a complex problem. So you create a certain output which strongly relates to so a tangible, physical, graspable output, which very often is a key core element of an act competence. Good. For whom that is still a little bit too overly structured, not free enough, the flowing pattern is quite helpful, I believe. And this is from a MOOC that we co-designed. It's called Managing Responsibly, a Coursera MOOC, where we do have by now a couple of tens of thousands of students, all of them practitioners in one way or another, learning responsible management. And there, of course, you can imagine such a diverse, large group. You cannot just pre-map a learning journey across the competence canvas. So we gave them that frame of reference and said, okay, ensure and report on how your learning journey actually connects to those 6 domains. And that could be in any sequence from any starting point, possibly. So they had a problem, a practical problem from their own practice that they were asked to describe in a learning diary. And while doing that, connecting it to the contents of the MOOC, seeing how the different contents help them to cope better with that problem. And at the same time, they were asked to report on those 6 domains, which then made them think about those 6 domains, and automatically, because we asked them to make sure they cover all 6 of them, they themselves in a natural flowing way were able to achieve a holistic responsible management learning. So the idea is that we actually can go with those with that competence canvas towards different types of holistic learning. In principle, you could even start at kindergarten age if you want, so all the way up to let's say mature adults education, if you want to think about it in terms of different ages, but also different types of types of complexity of learning if you want, so different degrees if you want to think in degrees, but also very different disciplines. I think it's a very open type of model that you can use in order to enable holistic learning in a variety of different settings. And we do have developed a couple of tools. So here you see two different versions of the canvas that you can draw on and use if you want to, but also we do have two different versions of prompts, visual prompts and verbal textual prompts. So if you're interested in using some of those, I would be happy to send those over while we're still working on the next publication, which is meant to include all of those contents. But also, if you just wanna let me know what you thought about this presentation, or if you just want to be in touch, please don't be a stranger.